My name is Caitlin Lefton, and this is my skeletal video. The first thing that I want to start with is the axial skeleton. So the first piece of the axial skeleton would be the skull, or the cranium, and that has some major bones that make up the top part here. The first part is the frontal bone. Then you have the parietal bones. Underneath those are the temporal bones. In the back, you have the occipital bone. Connecting these is something called sutures. So the first suture is the one that connects the frontal bone to the parietal bones, and that's called the coronal suture. The next suture that connects the parietal bones to the temporal bones are the squamous sutures. Connecting the occipital bone right back here to the parietal bone is the lambdoid suture. And the suture connecting the two parietal bones up here on the top of his head is the sagittal suture. The cranium also has 14 facial bones. So some of these facial bones would be made up in the orbitals, the nasal, and then you also have some bones that are more individual, such as the maxilla and the mandible. Making up your cheek, you have the zygomatic. And you also have the zygomatic process, which comes down right here. And that zygomatic process is important because it's where some major muscles in your jaw attach that help it move like this. So moving on from there, we're going to go down here to the bony thorax, which is where the ribs and the sternum are. The first 7 ribs are called true ribs, and that's because they connect directly to the sternum. The next couple are 8 through 12, and they connect to the sternum with cartilage, so that's why they're false. The bottom ones, though, are floating ribs, so they don't connect to the sternum at all. At the very bottom of the sternum, at this point that I keep touching, is the xiphoid process. And the xiphoid process is important because when you're giving CPR, you want to be really careful to push higher than that, because if you push on this part, it's very fragile and can puncture some vital organs. The last part of the axial skeleton that I want to talk to you about is the vertebral column, right here. The first 7 vertebrae make up the cervical part of the vertebral column. And the next part, the thoracic section of the vertebral column, has 12 vertebrae. And each one of these have processes on either side that connect to the ribs. You also have these, which are called the spinal processes. The next part of the vertebral column is the lumbar portion. And the lumbar vertebrae are the largest out of all of them. And it also includes the sacral part and the coccyx. The sacrum and the coccyx are the only fused vertebra in the entire vertebral column. Some important parts that each vertebra has is the body, the vertebral body, the vertebral arch, and the vertebral foramen. And the foramen is the hole in the center that the spinal cord goes up through. So that concludes the axial skeleton. And the next part we're going to talk about is the appendicular skeleton. So